Ah, hello, Miyahaba, Salam. Hope you're all safe and well in this increasingly dangerous world of ours. Bad news seems to be hypnotic, almost compulsive watching and listening to. And goodness knows there's plenty of bad news around, but I like to keep abreast of things but not totally immerse myself in bad news. I think long exposure to bad news not only can but does make you depressed. So be aware of what's going on. Moderate the amount that you watch. I think it's time for a good news channel. So if anybody has got any good news out there, let me know and let's spread the good news around. Right, well, I've been asked if I've got any tips on writing poetry and verse. Well, I'm not classically trained. I was an engineer and mathematician by profession. So I'm no expert, but for me, the idea is to keep things simple, get your message across in a simple manner that can be easily understood. I mean, one of the basic, and it might sound too basic, things about poetry is that the word that you have to rhyme with usually is at the end of a line. So don't finish a line with a word that's difficult to rhyme, or maybe even impossible to rhyme with. Words like orange or violin or picture or purple. Very difficult words to rhyme. Keep it simple. But I mean, if you're really, really smart, like William Shakespeare, you can invent a new word. That's what he used to do. He had an extensive vocabulary, but if he couldn't think of a suitable word out of that vocabulary to rhyme with whatever he was writing, he'd invent a word. What a good idea. He invented all sorts of words and phrases that we still use today. Good old Shakespeare. Well, poems don't need to be long and flowery and expansive to get over a message or a feeling. And the shortest poem I ever wrote consisted of 6 words. 6. It was part of a speech that I gave at my daughter Rachel's wedding. As father of the bride, I was called upon to make a speech, and I included this little poem as part of that speech. Just as some background to this, the wedding took part in a big hotel on the Yorkshire coastline, overlooking the North Sea and an area known as Robin Hood's Bay. Extremely beautiful bit of the country. And the weather, surprisingly for that part of the country, was absolutely superb. Even the North Sea, which is normally cold and forbidding, looked almost inviting, almost Mediterranean. Needless to say, it wasn't inviting enough for me to go have a swim in it. It was a wonderful occasion in every way. The friendship was unbelievable. So this little poem, to my mind, encapsulated that feeling in 6 words. And here it is. Remember, my daughter's called Rachel. And the poem is, I'm really glad I'm Rachel's dad. And that was it. Wild applause. But what you really need is a cosy corner to sit somewhere comfortably where you can relax and be peaceful and let ideas ferment in your head. And a good idea is to have a piece of paper and a pen where you can write these ideas down as they formulate. It's most annoying to think of a good idea only 10 minutes later not to be able to remember what it was. If you haven't got a paper and pen, if you're more technologically minded, like me, I have a little recording device so I can press the button, record my ideas, and hopefully it works. I prefer a pencil and paper. Well, good news. I have decided to declare today National Cozy Corner Day. I might even extend that to National Cozy Corner Week. Don't think a day is long enough. And to celebrate this momentous day, I'd like to read you a poem about a special friend of mine, which I wrote in this very corner. But before I do, for the benefit of my overseas friends, for whom English is a second language rather than their first language, a couple of points need to be explained, and one is a mention of a chap called Jack Horner in this poem. Well, Jack Horner was a character in an early 18th century nursery rhyme, and it went something like, little Jack Horner sat in a corner eating a Christmas pie. He put in his thumb and pulled out a plum and said, what a good boy am I. Little nursery rhyme. So when I mention Jack Horner, you'll know who I mean. And the second one is just a word that I've used which might not be familiar to my English as a second language friends. It's the word cove. If you look it up in the dictionary, the usual definition is a small inlet on the coast, a little sandy cove. But it's an old Victorian Dickensian word which can also mean a man, a chap. If you describe somebody as a friendly cove, it means he was a friendly sort of chap. Well, there we are, armed with that knowledge. Here's my little poem. Let me tell you about a special friend of mine. I'm not sure how old he is. I would guess about 9. He doesn't look much. He just stands in the corner. Best I can say is like little Jack Horner. He doesn't laugh, he doesn't cry, and he can't tell a joke. He doesn't swear or drink, but he does sometimes smoke. He doesn't bite or smell like my old shaggy dog, and his only requirements are some sticks or a log. When he's sleeping, he's cold, like an old burnt down candle. But rouse him and he'll soon be too hot to handle. When the day dawns all damp and it's brewing a storm, if I tend to him kindly, he'll soon have me warm. By now I suspect you've guessed the name of this cove. It's my wonderful, faithful old wood-burning stove. And there he is, burning merrily away in the corner and keeping me nice and cosy. So, National Cozy Corner Day. Well, believe it or not, that little nursery rhyme, written in, as I say, the early 18th century, was the subject of some moralistic approach, and some moralists decided that it was a poem about opportunism and greed. Well, let me tell you this, it wasn't. It's a nursery rhyme. Can you imagine children exposed to that nursery rhyme saying to each other, my word, I think that was a poem about opportunism, especially in politics. Oh no, I think it was more about greed. Oh, heaven's sake, it was a nursery rhyme. Well, I've written a silly poem, which I will share with you if I can find it. Yes, here it is. Here's one of my silly poems. I've started walking backwards. It's the funniest thing you've seen. I'm doing it so I can see exactly where I've been. It's sometimes rather awkward. I keep bumping into things. I really would prefer to fly, but I haven't any wings. Can you imagine the analysts and the moralists of the future deciding that, or asking questions, was this a poem about some mental problems that I have, where I could only look backwards and walk backwards, was afraid to face the future? Oh, was it a poem intended to prompt a discussion on the evolution of man and why we have arms instead of wings? No, it was just a silly poem written by an old man and his granddaughter. That's all. I think there's far too much analysis and discussion about inconsequential things. As Bertrand Russell, an old English philosopher, replied when he was asked what he thought about the origins of the universe. And let's face it, the amount of time spent on discovering the origins of the universe and the amount of money spent is completely, in my opinion, disproportionate to the value that the answer will provide. Will it make any difference if we know how the universe was started to our lives? I don't think so. And Bertrand Russell summed it up perfectly. His reply to the question was, the universe exists, that's all. So let's get on with it. Well, good old Bertrand. I think we'd be far better off researching into things that would affect our everyday lives, like a cure for cancer or dementia. That would make a considerable difference to a lot of people. Money well spent as opposed to money with very little consequence. Anyway, without getting too philosophical, I'd like to leave you with this little poem, this little thought. To tell someone you love them is a real nice thing to do. And it gets a whole lot nicer when they reply, I love you too. Think about that, okay? I'll see you next week. Bye-bye.